Commissioners, I want to recognize Bill Elmore to update you on a 40-year agreement that is getting ready to expire.
Well, if I can cover 40 years in 20 minutes, I'll try. Commissioners, next month at the February board meeting, we'll be bringing a resolution for your consideration that will address some of the facilities that we own in the 10 Mile Creek Drainage Basin, our decommissioning of those facilities, declaring them surplus, and transferring those to First Utility District. Before we presented that in detail next month, I wanted to give you a little bit of background and history on the area and why we are doing what we're doing at this point in time. This shaded area is the 10 Mile Creek Drainage Basin. As you can see, there's three different colors there. About a third of the basin is in the KUB service territory, shown in purple. A like amount pretty much in the green area for West Knox Utility District, and then south of the interstate, First Utility District. And to kind of get you oriented very quickly, this is I-40 that kind of goes right down the middle of the slide. The Morrell Road area is kind of the eastern boundary of the drainage basin. Cedar Bluff, Peters Road on the western boundary, and then Westland Drive on the south, and kind of the Ball Camp community on the north. In 1971, there was little or no wastewater service in that drainage basin. And at that time, KUB wasn't in the picture, but the City of Knoxville Wastewater Control System, First UD, and West Knox all had responsibility for providing service in that area. And what we tried to do, or what was attempted at the time, was to put together an agreement where all three parties could collectively communicate, coordinate, work together to provide wastewater service in a cost-effective manner at that point in time. So a 40-year agreement was put together that began once certain facilities were constructed that were a part of that agreement, and as it turns out, that effective date then was May the 8th of 1973. So we are approaching the 40-year anniversary of the effective date of that agreement. That agreement also anticipated that maybe we wouldn't be ready after 40 years to transfer it, and we might need 2 more extra years, and so that was also a part of that agreement. There were a number of obligations that I've got shown on this slide, but if you don't mind, I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide and talk you through those obligations using a map, because I think it's a little bit easier to see, and it's certainly easier for me to explain in that manner. Again, the shaded areas differentiating the 3 service territories. The City of Knoxville at the time, again, responsible for wastewater service. The city was responsible under the agreement for building a pump station that would serve all 3 entities. And interestingly enough, that pump station was not to be built in our service territory, but kind of down at the very head of the basin, deep in West Knoxville in First Utility District service territory. We would build the pump station. We would build the force main that brings that flow back to the city's collection system, that collection system leading on to the Fourth Creek plant that we just referred to in Julie's presentation. And the city would be responsible for the construction of metering stations at the point at which KUB, City of Knoxville then, entered the drainage basin of First UD, and the point at which West Knox Utility District entered that drainage basin. First Utility District would be responsible for these internal trunk lines and all other lines within their service territory, but specifically a joint use trunk line between them and West Knox that would be jointly funded. And collectively, the system, the entire basin would be served by those improvements. All those flows of all 3 parties going to the city's 10-mile pumping station, the city then pumping those flows and treating those flows, and the districts paying wholesale treatment costs to the city on a per gallon basis, which allowed the city to recover its operating cost as well as a capital component of that investment. That worked very well for a period of time, and over time things began to get more challenging as development occurred. Development was pretty rapid and pretty extensive in the basin. As always, development leads to more stormwater runoff. That runoff increased flooding levels in the 10-mile basin. That joint use trunk line that we just talked about runs right down 10 Mile Creek. So the wastewater systems began to see more and more inflow and infiltration, high wet weather flows, exceeding capacity, and that forced everybody to start looking at alternatives and looking at redundant facilities that could somehow minimize the impact on that trunk line. Ultimately, a lawsuit was required to kind of help define the terms of the agreement a little bit better understand the scope and the limitations that each of the parties had within the corners of that agreement. And ultimately then, changes were made to address those challenges. West Knox built a pumping station to intercept much of their flow coming to that joint use trunk line and take that flow back to their own facility, which by then had been constructed and upgraded and had sufficient capacity. First Utility District did something similar. They started building interceptor lines or parallel facilities to intercept some of their flows to keep them out of that joint use line. And over time, what that resulted in was much of the West Knox flow was going back to their treatment plant. Much of the First UD flow was going back to theirs. And the city's facilities at 10 Mile continued to pump base flows, all of the city's flows, and essentially act as an emergency standby facility for those high wet weather flows that couldn't be handled by the districts through their facilities. With the contract expiring a couple of years ago, we in the districts began to look at what do we want to do going forward. We only had a certain amount of time to deal with that with the contract about to expire. Typically, we could basically just everybody go their own way, every entity for themselves, and everybody just go do what you want to do. We could have gone together and crafted another agreement that basically was a mirror image of the one that we had and continue day to day like we had been doing, or we could come up with a new agreement that addressed issues like redundant facilities, something that would minimize capital cost, and something that would potentially redefine the roles and duties of the parties involved. And essentially, that is pretty much where we landed. Let me walk you through here a little bit more detail on what was looked at and what we just mentioned. West Knox, at their meter here, they are going to do and already have underway some extensive rehabilitation within their drainage basin that will further reduce their dependence upon this trunk line. Between that rehabilitation and other capital improvements, it's their intent over the next couple of years to totally eliminate any need they have to provide flows through that meter and into the lower part of the 10 Mile basin. First Utility District has already gone through some extensive plant expansions. They're also doing some other work in their basin. They are already under construction with a pumping station that will intercept their flows and pump them back to their treatment plant at Turkey Creek. When we started looking at what options we had and what made sense from an engineering standpoint, we looked at several things, one of which was to allow our flows to continue doing what they do today, utilizing the First UD trunk line, get those flows down to our 10 Mile pumping station, pump them through the force main and back to Fourth Creek. Given the scenarios that the other districts are pursuing, that would leave us with a large pump station with relatively small flows. So it would be a difficult operational challenge in that regard. The other thing we could do is come up here to the limits or to the boundary of our service territory, somewhere in here, intercept those flows and pump them back with a new pump station in force main to get to Fourth Creek. Or we could essentially allow those flows to continue to come down that trunk line to the 10 Mile pump station, but instead of entering our pumping station, be diverted along with the other West Knox flows, the other First UD flows, to their new pump station, allow them to pump it to their plant at Turkey Creek, and essentially do would allow them to do for us what we've done for them for the last 40 years, which is treat their flows. The advantages to that is that it takes all of those flows off of the Fourth Creek plant. And significantly, that's a big load on wet weather days like this, or the last 5 days that we've had. So wet weather reduction of flows at Fourth Creek is a big advantage to us. It eliminates the expense of our continuing to maintain force main, or spending $4.5 million on a new pump station in force main to replace that one and pump those flows from our boundary back to our plant. And at the same time, this option gives us a lot of flexibility going forward. If conditions or circumstances change and we want to consider other options, that's always available to us. So the terms of the new agreement are to extend it for the existing agreement for 2 years, give everybody the opportunity to finish their construction and the rehabilitation that's underway. The agreement would expire once the first utility district facilities are operational. For us, we think that will be in a few months, not years. West Knox won't be ready quite that quickly, but for all practical purposes, in a few months, First Utility District would be providing wastewater service to KUB via their pumping station. We would decommission our large pumping station. We would surplus all of the equipment that we could that had value to us and continued use, and then we would propose to transfer the property and the facilities at the 10-mile pumping station to First Utility District. Once then that's done, FUD, First Utility District, has all responsibilities for wastewater treatment, pumping and handling all flows that we deliver to them at the boundary of our service territory. West Knox then completes their flows, and the existing 2-year extension, or the proposed 2-year extension on the agreement would expire and would exist no more. As far as what we need at this point in time, as I said earlier, we'll be coming back to you in February with a resolution addressing the transfer of surplus property associated with the pumping station to First Utility District, and then implementing the various aspects of the agreement that allow us to turn facilities over to them, turn our wastewater flow to them, and them to take responsibility for that treatment and disposal going forward. Any questions?
Is that going to impact the customers at all as far as cost or anything?
Customers would never know it was going on, and they would pay the same rates they always pay, like all our other customers, just as theirs have in the past. For the most part, customers don't even know we've got that arrangement. It's a very unique arrangement between 3 districts who have worked relatively well together over 40 years to provide service in a pretty seamless manner.
What Bill, do you think of in that 10-mile area, what percentage of the flow currently goes into Fourth Creek? I mean, is that the total flow in Fourth Creek, is that 5%, 8%, 1%?
Total flow in Fourth Creek is probably, it is less than 10%. Now, on a wet weather day, it can be much more than that, but it is less than 10% on a daily basis.
And what you're proposing, even wet weather days, is all going to go to
Yes.
first?
Once this is done, no flows, ours or anyone else's, from that 10-mile basin will go anywhere except to either West, who's intercepting and taking care of their own, or First, who will be located down there at the low point of the drainage basin and will be responsible for their entire area and ours. There'll be no flows coming out of that basin going to our plant.
Bill, since we're under consent decree and they are not, are they gonna have to upgrade whatever flows from us into them to meet different standards?
service territory, there would be some obligations associated with it. But this is, the fact that they would be accepting some flows from us does not obligate them to any of the terms of the consent decree. If they were, if facilities were involved, active facilities, yes.
So if there's an SSO, either in our, what you pictured as our territory or below our territory, but our flow, we're not gonna get penalized or.
If the SSO occurs before our flows reach that meter, it's ours. If it occurs after it reaches that meter, it's theirs. That's the point of demarcation between our responsibilities and theirs.
So that would take about 10% of the flow off of our system, which will help.
It'll take 10% or less off Fourth Creek, not the entire system.
It's a little confusing, but after all this is completed, we won't have any more relationship in this area with West Knox Utility District, is that correct?
There will still be a little bit of a relationship with West Knox because they have some customers that we serve through our Walker Springs Road pumping station. Those customers aren't metered. We use their actual flow, water records to bill them for that. Those flows go through Walker Springs.
Does that arrangement and then the First Utility District arrangement, are they done through contracts? And will there be a future contract